What if the moment you were told to keep the peace was actually the moment your rights were being violated? Today's conversation with Brittany Stevens pulls back the curtain on the hidden power dynamics of the workplace, where silence is often mistaken for consent, and where knowing your rights can change the trajectory of your career, your confidence, and even your future. If you've ever questioned a situation, felt the weight of power imbalance, or wondered what real protection looks like, this episode will give you the clarity, courage, and the path forward. Brittany, thrilled to have you here today. Thank you. First of all, thank you for the work you do. And thank you for being there to be such a support to, anyone who is dealing with those hidden power dynamics. So I'm going to set us up by you giving us a little feedback on your background and what's led you to the work you're doing today.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation. I think it's really important to spread awareness on these issues. I do it every day, right? So I am a plaintiff side employment discrimination attorney. I represent people who have been terminated, sexually harassed, suffer what's called a hostile work environment at their place of work. What has brought me to this field? I mean, there's so much to say about that, but I've always been interested in the law from a very young age because I grew up with a family of lawyers, but I knew that I wanted to help people. And I know that a lot of lawyers say that, but I knew that if I was going to go into this profession, I wanted to represent the person, right? The individual. And this field is it's what I was meant to do. I'm so inspired by my courageous clients and, their ability to speak up and to allow me to represent them. I just feel very grateful that I get to do this type of work.
Wow. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, and I'm sure that your clients are very grateful that you do this kind of work. Not an easy job. I mean, and I'm sure that given recent events, especially over the last 12 to 15 months, things have escalated from, whether it be harassment, bullying in the workplace, and even terminations. Like I've seen a lot of that myself, where you come into work, you're a high performing executive, and then you totally blindsided and you're let go from the situation. Right.
Yes.
And that's tough. That's hard on the confidence, especially.
Right. And we see that a lot. And what employers do is they hide behind like a mass layoff or like a restructuring. In reality, the motive for the termination or the demotion is really, a discriminatory or a retaliatory one. So, yes, we see that often.
Well, I'm sure, and I don't want to get us off track, but I think what you just said there is so important because so often even the employee will not recognize it, right? And so I hear this with even some of the clients that I work with. They'll say, "Oh, but I've had such a great career with this company, and this is just part of it to keep the company alive." Meanwhile, they forget about their own rights, and that sets you up for what's next, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've represented many women that are navigating, different, varied workplace difficulties and experiences. What are some of the patterns you see in how power is used or misused when harassment or discrimination occurs?
It's a great question. The first thing that comes to my mind is, the pattern of institutional protection. And this is something I see all the time. Companies, organizations often prioritize and protect the powerful individuals that they employ. And these are oftentimes the people that are harassing lower level employees. I'm always sometimes shocked when, a client comes to me and they tell me about, the discrimination that they face. And then they tell me, well, I know that this has also been done before because someone else had complained about this individual. Or, we go to court and we find out that there's prior complaints against them through their, investigative file or their disciplinary records that we receive. So I think just the pattern of companies sometimes protecting these individuals. People go to HR, and it's a very courageous thing to be able to speak up and make a complaint to human resources. And human resources doesn't always have the employees' best interest in mind, right? They should be there to help the employee, the person who's coming forward with their complaint. They should be investigating the harassment. But what we find a lot of times is that there is a lot of cover up, and that there's a lot of protection for these, C-suite executives or these supervisors, these managers who are doing the harassment. So that's something that I feel like I every single time I know it happens, but it kills me. It really does.
So disappointing, right?
So disappointing. Yeah. So, that's something I'd say. Another thing that I think a lot of people can understand is that, harassment is always about control, right? These individuals who are sexually harassing, another individual at the company, there's often a power imbalance. Yes. And, the person who has the authority tests boundaries, right? And it's maybe not always obvious to begin with. A lot of times people call me and they say, I think I'm being harassed, but I'm not sure, because it's not, no one's, sexually assaulting me, right? Or physically touching me, but they're making me uncomfortable. And that's sexual harassment as well, right? Just because you haven't been physically assaulted doesn't mean that you're not getting sexually harassed. And, there's often this misuse of power that happens when the power dynamic is so large.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. Like a couple of things I want to tag into there that you were talking about. So I'm doing a doctorate right now, and my focus is trust, power, and the invisible load on women. Right. And one of the things,
I love that topic.
Yeah, it's a big one, right?
Yes.
And when you were talking about human resources, like that came up in a lot of my research, right? Like you have a person that's in a dual role, right? Because their primary responsibility has to be protecting the company.
Right.
But from an employee perspective, the employees have nowhere else to go. And so there becomes this frustration. People stop speaking up, right? Because they go, well, why would I tell human resources if it's not going to go anywhere? They're just there to protect the company. And so I think somehow we got to figure out, like, how do you balance the power, right?
Right.
Because even what you were describing, the power imbalances, that can happen with C-suite. It can also happen with a high-performing individual. I saw this in one organization that I was working with where one of the leaders, he wasn't C-suite, but he was like a top producer. And so he got protected a lot, even though multiple women came forward and said, he has to stop this behaviors. But there was a blind eye turned to it.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Even having just like influence within the company, right? Regardless of your position, it makes people not want to come forward and complain. But I really like what you said about how HR operates, because that is a very big deterrent for people to even come and complain to begin with, right? Because people know if I complain, at the end of the day, HR is going to do everything they can to protect the employer, the company.
Yeah. And that's where that silence often becomes the default tendency, right? Because people go, what's the point? And so they will either just put up with it or they leave, which also costs the company a lot, right?
Right.
And it's difficult for people to speak up and use their voice. So what do you see with the people that you represent? What's the biggest reason that keeps them from speaking up? And what helps them decide, I guess is the best way to say that, decide that, no, I am going to speak up and address this?
Sure. I think the obvious answer is retaliation. A lot of my clients are fearful that if they come forward, that there will be some adverse action taken against them.
Yeah.
People go to work to pay their bills, and the thought that they come forward and they complain and that they may be terminated or, demoted, or maybe get put on, even a performance improvement plan, some kind of, action that may be taken against them that affects their livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that happen all the time. So it makes sense why people are scared to complain. Some other things, there's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of, are people going to believe me? Especially if the person they're making the complaint against is someone who's influential at the company. They don't always want to go up against these influential, high-ranking people or non-high-ranking. People don't want to be seen as the complainer.
Mm-hmm.
They're fearful that the company will then all of a sudden, see them differently. They'll be judged differently. I can write a book on the reason why so many of my clients don't complain, but they're all very, very real reasons.
Yeah.
And depending on where they work and how big the company is, some of these companies are smaller companies and the investigations are not that confidential, and they're fearful that people will hear about it, they'll know about it. So those are some of the reasons why people don't come forward.
Yeah. And all of that makes sense, right? Because the reality is we're in a very difficult economic period, right? Where people are downsizing, right sizing, to your point earlier. Sometimes it can become an excuse to, okay, this is a complainer, so let's make that change. But what are some options? Like if you're talking to clients, what are some ways to help them navigate that?
Well, I think people need to, in some ways selfishly start thinking about themselves, right? Because documenting things, preserving evidence helps people feel confident in coming forward. I know a lot of times if people have witnesses or even just some kind of something to kind of back up what they're going through,
Mm-hmm.
they often feel more confident to come forward. But I just want to remind everyone that's not to say you need that, right? Like your testimony, what actually happened to you, is evidence, right? That's evidence in a courtroom. So you don't always need to feel like you have to have someone who saw something or, an email or a text message. But I do see a lot of times people say, well, it was just happening and I didn't want to say anything. But then finally, I confided in one of my colleagues, and now they're going to come with me to HR, or now they are going to corroborate the fact that after this assault or this action, I went to them, and now they can help be like a supporting witness to me. So documenting, preserving evidence is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I often get involved, sometimes even before my clients complain internally to the company.
Okay.
And I help them with that process. A lot of times behind the scenes, HR doesn't even know I exist, but I'm there to help them with their complaint, but also depending on what the outcome is with what HR does, to kind of step in, right? Sometimes people are just looking for a transfer, and I help them with that behind the scenes, and then I don't even come into the picture at all. Other times we see the company not take it seriously, and then my external complaint comes shortly thereafter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends on what everyone is looking to do.
Okay. Well, and you said something a moment ago, like we often will not speak up because we start self-doubting, right? And then there's this worry of, what if I do lose my job? And so I think there's also that component internally, like how you set yourself up for the possibilities of what could happen, right? And where are you in the life cycle with your career? And I think for me, where I look at that, it's you have a choice, right? And it just depends on how committed you are to making a change. Either way, whether you stay or you go, but knowing that you're worth speaking up for you. right?
That's right.
And I think that's the for me, that's the important message, regardless of how HR shows up, regardless of how the company shows. Like, this is important for you to speak what your truth is.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. So you often talk about, the environment. Like, if somebody is feeling like it's unsafe or it's discriminatory, what are the first steps that they should take to protect themselves?
I think this goes back to what I was just talking about, really, preserving evidence and
Mm-hmm.
documenting things. At the end of the day, the company will be protecting themselves. And, it's up to you, and, hopefully you retain a lawyer to kind of protect yourself. But writing down, key dates, witnesses, timestamps, what actually happened, right? Because our memories are not always the best, a week later
Great
or a
point.
month later. I a lot of times clients take like notes in their phone
Mhm.
of okay, this happened to me on this day. This is who was around. Documenting things in real time is very
Mhm.
important,
Mhm.
but also preserving that evidence. Saving text messages, emails, company policies. A lot of times our client will come to us with like text messages that, corroborate the sexual harassment or discrimination.
Mhm.
And, we find out through the company's attorneys that those text messages do not exist with the harasser anymore, right?
Mm.
They were deleted. So just even thinking to keep them, to,
Mhm.
keep a second copy of them. Technology is not always as reliable as we wish it was. So just kind of backing things up. And then for me, I really, speaking to a lawyer is very important, right? Even if you don't want to move forward, just like understanding your rights um, is powerful, right?
Mhm.
Even if you don't want to litigate, you don't want to go to court, you don't even want a lawyer to write a letter, just understanding that what you're going through might be unlawful is empowering in and of itself.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I mean, I've often recommended when somebody has shared with me, it's like, maybe you should just have a phone call, right? And just understand what your rights are. Because I think sometimes, and you said this earlier, sometimes we go in our heads and we're like, did that really happen? Was that really harassment? And we start questioning ourselves. But yet, you often see that it happens. And
Right.
and by the way, when we say this, like, our audience, like, this can be female or male leaders that do this, right? So to your point earlier, it's about who's influencing what's happening within an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other big topic I hear a lot about is when women become pregnant, right? And or there's parental leave, parental transitions that are taking place. This is a really vulnerable time. So what rights should employees understand, professional women and men, quite frankly, understand during and after pregnancy?
Right. You have the right to certain accommodations based on your pregnancy, whether during the time of your pregnancy, when you come back. I think just even knowing about those accommodations is really important. I'll give an example. I needed to take pumping accommodations when I returned from the office,
Mm-hmm.
and having a place at your company, a private place where no one else has access to, is something that the company must provide you with, right? You are also free of retaliation for taking protected leave. So if you go out on maternity leave or paternity leave, your employer is not allowed to retaliate against you because you took that leave. You're entitled to the leave in and of itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on where you live. I'm in New York,
I was
so
just going to ask you that.
I'm in New York, so there are certain laws that offer protection based on certain protected leaves, whether it's maternity leave or caregiver leave,
Mm.
sick leaves. So being able to understand what those protections are and what the laws even, provide for you, how much time you get, because each state is very different with
Mhm.
what the protections are. So being able to speak to a lawyer who understands those state specific protections is important.
Mhm.
But I really want people to know that just because you take time off doesn't give the company the ability to treat you differently.
Yeah.
Right. And we talked about retaliation earlier, right? We have the obvious things like a termination, but retaliation can be subtle too, right?
Yeah.
You can come back from leave and you are on track for that promotion. And now it is given to, the male who was not taking maternity leave. Or you're now getting, written up or excluded from meetings. So it's all these things to kind of look for
Yeah.
that, you can be protected for in
Yeah.
the laws.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because that just came up for me just a couple of weeks ago, where a client came back from maternity leave and was up for promotion and was denied promotion. And the rationale wasn't because she was pregnant, but it was because her sales had dropped significantly. Right. Well, of course they did, because she was on maternity leave. Right. So, and to your point, like every state is different. And every country is different. Like I'm out of Toronto, and we have a 12 to 18 month maternity leave, and so it is a much longer extended period than what you would have in the US, but the laws are very similar. There's not supposed to be retaliation for you taking that.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Like I think about that. And I even think back when I had my children. My children are now 21 and 25. And my first, I took 5 weeks off. Yeah. Stupid. I know. My second, I took 7 months off. Right. And so, part of that too is, as a mother, you only get that once. Right. As a father, a new father, you only get that once. And so it's weighing out what is most important, I think, to you, and not letting someone intimidate you.
Right.
And that intimidation is very real. Right. So how do you maintain confidence and courage when you feel like you're being intimidated by the power that is in charge of the company?
Oh, I mean, it's a hard thing to do, right? I think a lot of it goes to like the company culture and where you're at and feeling confident in the place that you chose to work at. I always tell clients now, like when you're looking for a new job, like look at what their policies are. Like look at, Google them, look to see what people are saying about them. Because if you feel like you're at a place that's going to protect you, hopefully they are. But that's not always the case. But I'd also just say, finding someone that you can talk to through this difficult time is so important, whether that be a therapist, a lawyer, a friend, a family member, someone who you can confide in, who, maybe just is the extra push for you to come forward and complain. Those people are really powerful people, right? They're often behind the scenes and they're just there to support the individual who's getting harassed, but they play like a big part in the story.
Yeah.
And I think everyone, if you can find one person who can kind of like hold your hand through this very difficult time, that makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I want to talk a little bit about what you just said there, like going on and looking at their policies. Culture plays a huge role in this, right? And so, how would I have my own thoughts on this, Brittany? But how would you advise someone to really get into the crux of what their culture is, right? Because that can often undermine the psychological safety. And so how do you know that before you take that leap into that organization?
Right. And you may never really, right? I think like talking to people who work there is the best way. Sometimes you can look on LinkedIn, you can connect with people. Oh, you work here. I'm, just got a job offer. I'd love to connect with you to find out certain things. Talking to previous employees, because, the policies and procedures are important to look at. But I will tell you, I can't tell you how many times, my client will suffer some kind of harassment and the defense attorney tells me, well, we have a policy that says, no retaliation is allowed here, right? A zero tolerance discrimination policy. And I tell them, good for you. I'm glad you have those policies, but they're not enforced, right? Yeah. Just because you have them doesn't mean that they're actually like implemented. But some companies don't even have policies to begin with, which is problematic in and of itself.
Very true.
So, I think you really want to take like a, kind of a holistic approach to things. Look at the procedures, talk to people. If there is a revolving door of employees, that's probably a red flag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Great call out. Well, and you can go on Glassdoor, like there's Reddit, there's different tools available now where you can actually check that out. I'm glad you said that, like going on and connecting with people who actually work in the environment. I often talk about, like, when I'm working with clients, like if let's say they're on the job hunt, right? And they're interviewing, one of the first things I have them do is what are the value statements of this organization? How does that align with your own values, right? And do they actually walk what they talk? And the only way to know that is when you're talking to other people.
That's so true. And you know what's interesting? I was just interviewing someone recently, and we were interested in this candidate, and they asked to speak to a current employee at our firm to kind of figure out if this is the right place for them, like a recent hire that we had made. And I was like, sure, yes. Like talk to them. That's such a good idea, right? Because it's a two-way fit.
100%. It's always two-way, right? And you'll get better engagement from that employee if they feel like they're coming into an organization where they fit, right? And that psychological safety becomes so important. Regardless. And I love that they asked to speak to another employee, because that also, if you hire that person, they already now have a connection. It's not like you're walking in to a brand new environment without knowing someone.
Right.
Yeah, love that. So audience, you heard that. That's a great tip for you. If you're out looking for that next opportunity, take time to do your due diligence. It's not about, oh my gosh, I have to get a job. It's like finding the right job, the right career, the right place for you. So Brittany, I know we have to wrap up, but if you could leave everybody who's listening, woman or man, one message about their power, their rights, their voice, what would you want them to walk away with today?
Understanding the law is, and what rights you have is power, right? So, calling a law firm for a free consultation, speaking to a lawyer just about what you're going through. You don't have to sign up with that lawyer. You don't have to go to court, right? No one is expecting you to, litigate, but just to understand that what is happening to you may or may not be unlawful is the most powerful piece of information you can have, right? So knowledge is power, and that's the first step to protecting yourself. Our job is to make sure our clients are protected, whether it's in the courtroom or whether it's through just being behind the scenes. And I always want people to have that information before anything else.
Yeah, arm yourself. Know right. What's possible for you either way, right? Like, I think it's a great message. And so I know I didn't get to ask you everything because there's only so much time. So is there anything we didn't talk about that we should make sure we cover off before we wrap up today?
Well, I mean, I just, I practice in New York, but I represent people that are sexually harassed or discriminated against based on pregnancy. We talked about that, but also there's so many other protected classes, right? So we deal with race, national origin, age, disability, caregiver leave. So, it's important to just understand that if you are being treated less well because of a particular protected class, that is when you should start thinking, what's going on here, right? Why am I getting treated differently? So, it's not just sexual harassment and pregnancy. There's a lot of different protections that the law provides for.
Yes, absolutely. And what you said earlier, I just want to echo that. Knowledge is power. Know what your rights are.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Where can people find you, Brittany? Because, we may hang up today and they go, oh, darn, I wish Vicki had asked her this. Or you might say, oh, I wish I had shared that.
Yes. Yes. So you can find me on my website at Phillips and Associates. My name is Brittany Stevens. My email is directly on that on my website. I also am very responsive on LinkedIn. You can find me under Brittany Stevens Alper. Alper is my married name. And happy to connect on LinkedIn as well.
Amazing. Amazing. So, ladies and gentlemen, you know now where to find Brittany. If you have additional questions, or if there's something you want us to highlight more, reach out to one of us and let us know what that is. Brittany, thank you so much for being here today. Very valuable. And I know our audience is probably walking away going, I wish I had known this when.
Right. Yes.
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. And thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And audience, thank you for being here. We know you have a choice. Visit us at Women in Leadership Empowered. Sign up for our newsletter. It'll give you a recap on all the great podcasts that we do every single month. And we do not bombard your email inbox. I promise you that. Or maybe once or twice a month, because that drives me crazy. So do register for our newsletter so that you get all the latest and greatest. Brittany, thank you. Thank you for the work you do. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Will Talk, sponsored by Women in Leadership Empowered. To learn more about our programs, please visit www.willempowered.com. We look forward to seeing you in our community.